You know, when I made that leap of faith of just doing music full time, there's no safety net.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
zero. And so you don't have a choice.
You got to make it work.
You've got to make it work. I sometimes feel like pressure makes diamonds. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, you know, if you're cushy at home and you don't have to pay any rent or whatever, then you just sit around and it's not like, it's good to have a bit of pressure sometimes.
If you could go back in time, is there any advice that you would give to yourself?
My main thing that I look back and my regrets are always...
Thanks for being here,
pleasure,
Archie.
man.
This is podcast number 3 for Dojo. It's a pleasure to have you on as a guest. Me and you have quite a long history.
A lot of history.
A lot of history
Yeah.
as friends and as DJs as well, like playing for the same brands.
Totally.
And I really just want to get into everything. And we start right at the beginning. How did you get into electronic music? How did the passion start?
So I begin at the beginning, I guess. I grew up in Wales. My mum and her sister, this was, basically kind of early 90s, late 80s were ravers. And obviously I was too young for it then. But as I became more and more aware, I was very aware of like what they were up to, what they were into,
Okay.
and that kind of thing. And so
How old were you at this point?
Well, I was 7 or 8 probably
okay.
when I started realize, they were going to like M25 orbital raves.
Right.
And they were going to like free parties and that kind of thing. But I think what it was that really made me kind of understand was that all the music in the car was always hardcore, acid, drum and bass, jungle.
Amazing.
So and then as time progressed, then like my auntie got into like garage and stuff. So that was always like garage and so I kind of grew up hearing that. And then there was always like copies of Mixmag around. So I was hearing the music, reading the Mixmag, and then like it was around the time, I guess as time went on, that there was things like Ibiza Uncovered came on the TV and stuff like that. And I was then putting all those pieces together. So I was like, oh, that's the music from, oh, right. And then like really getting into it. And then when I was at school, all of my like kind of English projects, whether it was like, write about what you're passionate about, they always ended up being about rave culture or music. Like when I did we had like a speech contest at school when I was 11 and I did mine on the Prodigy. And like everyone else has done like rock formations and like, pirate ships and shit.
Mate,
and
it was preordained. It's almost like you had no choice.
I was like, groomed into it basically. And then also, me and all my friends were really into skating. So, and I basically brought like Prodigy music to the school that I was at and to my group of friends. And
Fat of the Land.
Fat of the Land, the Prodigy Experience, Jill to Generation, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then Left Field and all that kind of stuff. But basically, when I don't know whether you can keep this in, but when I was 12 and I'd moved schools and I'd gone to one in basically Worcestershire, and I don't know whether it was because I wanted to impress the other kids or whatever, but they were all into skating and stuff as well. So, but I went home and I stole an E from my mum's drawer in her bedroom.
We can keep that in.
Yeah. I stole an E from my mum's bedroom and I split it into quarters, and me and 3 others all had a quarter of an E each, and put the Prodigy on and put our skates on and went like like I'm mental listening to Prodigy. And so I mean that was like very early memories of it. And then basically music wise it kind of evolved into, I don't know, like it's always bouncing between like, obviously I was too young to go to parties, so a lot of the films at the time there was a lot of focus on rave culture and done so much better.
Human Traffic,
who incidentally Justin Kerrigan, who wrote that, was my auntie's roommate.
No way.
Yes. So that's why.
What a legend.
Yeah,
like I never realized until much, much later that the guy that comes in the record shop that goes, any jangling guy, that's him.
Yeah.
And I was just
crazy.
like, oh my, he's like, I always thought that guy's kind of weird. And like, I wonder why they never fleshed him out as a character, because he was kind of a cool character in the movie. And
Great
that was the
cameo.
director. Yeah.
Great cameo.
Amazing.
Yeah. So there was that, and then there was things like Blade. Do you remember Blade? Like,
yeah.
The rave scene.
Yeah. Really sort of acidy soundtrack.
That, and I remember
and the Matrix at the time as well.
Exactly. Exactly what I was about to say. And I remember literally going into, I can't remember what the record store was, and just saying like, what is this music? And the guy was like, big beat, I guess you call it big beat electronica. So I was like, and I went down that rabbit hole. And I guess it was the time I must have been 15 or 16. And then then drum and bass started to come into my kind of, spectrum, whatever it is. And then like trance and just generally just consuming every kind of electronic music that I could. That's where the passion came from. And then in terms of, I think, the actually going to clubs didn't start till, my mum and my auntie took me and my cousin to free parties and stuff like that when we were very young, but that obviously you're too young to really appreciate it. But I remember going to Fabric when I was 17, and that was probably the first time when I was like, right, okay, this is all the things that I've been reading about, seeing on TV and imagining in my head all came like right in my face, and it was intimidating, scary, exciting, all those things at once. The bass, the volume. I've never heard anything like that before, and that was it. I think the worm had turned at that point. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to hear. I can relate to that so much. It's very similar to sort of my story, and I don't want to get too much into it because this podcast is not about me. But what I find interesting, and the parallels that I find interesting, is that the journey started way before the actual clubbing experience.
The seeds,
the seeds were planted along the way. And for me, the seeds were planted also like at a young age from like my parents listening to kind of cool music and stuff, listening to funk and soul and that kind of stuff. And then it was my brother, who's 4 years older than me, who was really into like going clubbing, and he bought like all of the early stuff like Inner City, and I had really lucky. It was really lucky that I had a brother that had amazing musical taste.
That's great.
I think 4 or 5 years before I stepped foot in my first club, I was just like, I can't wait for the day where I can finally go. You know what I mean? Like I'm just gearing up to this. My whole life is building up to this moment.
Exactly
you know,
exactly.
And then the experience when you're there for the first time, where you're in this new world, and you're just like, this is just like the movies. You know, like.
So what was your first club?
It was
the first
club,
clubbing experience.
It was a club called Unit in Hamburg. Hamburg was the closest big city where I lived. Yeah. And Hamburg had like a budging. This was like early 90s already. Like, so like, I'm a bit older than you. So it's like early 90s. So it was, Hamburg had like a house scene. In that day, it was hard trance, German hard trance. Yeah. So Sven Vath's record label, IQ Records, they were like really pushing that sort of hard trance sound, quite fast paced. 135, 140. 145 BPM, arpeggiated stuff, but cool stuff, you know, because like a lot of those records from that time, I can see DJs like Nina Kravitz, like Charlotte DeWitt, they're digging out those records now and playing them in their sets now. You know, they're going back to an era that was even before they started clubbing or going out and drawing inspiration on that, because it's the culture is so rich and so deep. Okay, I mean that's amazing. So your mum was definitely a big inspiration here. Yeah. Was your dad into it as well, or not so much?
No, not really. My dad wasn't really that involved in my life. But my mum had a boyfriend who was a club promoter.
Right.
And they were together from about 94, 95. And he had a night, and basically that's what kind of continued what I think my mum was into for maybe the following 5 years or so. I'm not, or however long, but no. In short, my dad wasn't into it, but he's very into music, more classical stuff and things like that, but not electronic music at all.
Right. So, but something must have happened here, right? So, like, because I was pretty much on the same journey, but then there comes a time where you want to step from being a consumer of music to being somebody that's, you know, the purveyor or the performer of music. How did that seed get planted? How was the first exposure to actually DJing then, from being a clubber?
So my mum, I think for my like 14th birthday, just went and got me a set of turntables without even asking for it. There you go. Purple Newmark belt drives. Really basic stuff. But there was 2 purple Newmark belt drives and a 2-channel mixer and these tiny little crap speakers that go with it. But then I was kind of like messing around in my bedroom for pretty much my whole senior school, really. Had zero idea what I was doing. Obviously, there's no YouTube. I had no one to ask. So I'm literally just like trying to beat match. And I think so. Gave up with that and then started trying to scratch and things like that. And then
that doesn't really work with belt drives.
That doesn't really work with belt drives at all. So just messing around. And then never. And I remember throughout pretty much my whole school time until nearer the end, being like, "Oh, I want to be a DJ. I want to grow up. I want to be a DJ." So like for that whole school period, and then that changed as my head completely like turned on a 180 degree. And then I was really into the army, and I wanted to join the army for ages and ages. And then it wasn't until I got back to uni that back immersed in kind of club culture and world.
Because you go out a lot in the first
exactly.
Almost the entire time at uni.
I mean, for me, it was the entire time, yeah. And then that was it, really. Then I was like, oh, actually, I might pick this up again.
Yeah.
And I got another set of some Stanton STR8s and what was the mixer? Behringer mixer. And then I was locked in my bedroom for like the second 2 years of uni, and pretty much didn't leave my bedroom until I came out 2 years later, and I was like, had learned to properly mix, learned to beat match, learned to, recorded some mixes, got them out to clubs, started playing out at clubs at uni. And that's pretty much it. When I graduated,
what genre? Already house?
And it was like
time?
electro breaks.
Okay.
And then it towards the end, it started to become minimal.
Right.
More minimal stuff. And then, so pretty much by the end of uni, I was ready to start playing club gigs. And I did. And I graduated just and came to London. And I won a DJ competition. I won a competition to DJ at Cargo. And I might have skipped a few years here. This might be going on to like 2007, 8 now. But I won this DJ competition. And I met a guy called Alex Harris, who I started before Moscow Records, a label. He was involved with a label called Further Project. And me and him went off and started Moscow, which then turned into Microhertz.
But, okay, so take me back to that decision to start the label as well, because I feel there's all these steps that eventually get you to have the skill set and the full sort of range of business activities that you need to have to really, have a professional career. And I feel, a label at one point in every DJ's career is something that they need to do. Totally. So like that's fairly early on though that you decided to start the label, because you weren't touring internationally or anything like that. No, it was
super early, but I think it wasn't. I probably wouldn't have done that if I hadn't met Alex. And basically, if I hadn't entered that DJ competition, I think I probably was.
And what was his reasoning to get you into that then? Like
into the label?
Like, yeah.
We just hit it off straight away, and talk music and like our ambitions and things like that. Because he was already involved with another one. And I think he wanted to start his own thing. So he said, look, let's just do this. And it started in, I think it was December 2009. It was when we eventually started Moscow Records. So, and that was purely because we were making music and no one was listening to our demos.
That's why I started a label.
Totally, I think it's pretty much why anyone does, really.
It's just like, got all these tunes, sending them out, never getting a reply. Totally. Let's start a label.
But I think that's maybe changed now, because I think now, because of social media and stuff like that, you can actually build a profile and then do it retrospectively.
Yeah.
You can become a relatively sizable artist and then go, well, I'll start my label. Whereas I think before, because you didn't have that social media influence, you kind of had to start a label so that people could be like, oh, that's Ben. He's involved with his projects, and that's kind of how people can figure out what it is that you do and what you're into and what you play.
I want to touch on that later on, is for what young and up and coming artists have to do in 2024 to make it, and what your views are on that. But like I recently recorded like a short sort of YouTube short, 10-minute short, like how to make it in 2024 and what are the different paths to take. And obviously there's many roads that lead to Rome, but at the same time, there's tried and tested ways. And I feel, there's a whole bunch of artists that I met who straight away were just gunning to release on one of the major sort of platforms. I met a DJ a couple of years ago and he's like, I only ever wanted to be on Hot Creations, and that's the only label that I sent demos to, and I never even tried anything else. And he got on Hot Creations, and then he became like played at Paradise, and now he's got a great career.
Nice, yeah.
And I feel that's the fast track. Do you feel that like and then obviously then there's also people like brand builders, like people that build it around a party and a record label, and then that becomes like a thing. And then nowadays you also have the now you have the TikTok or
just
the Instagram DJ.
Pure TikTok, pure social, and no
pure
music.
social, nothing else. You know, like, and they become the biggest DJs in the world.
Well,
now.
yeah, but how long for? That's it.
And also one of the things that like I always ask myself, like if that is what you're trying to do, it works for some people, but can you replicate that? Is there a recipe to replicate that? I know how, like, you can replicate starting a record label.
Yeah.
You can replicate building up a decent social media following, you know. Can you replicate getting a viral video that's going to get you known to millions of people overnight? I don't think you can. Like, you can try, but there's the chances of whether it will happen or not, you just don't know.
And also, even if you do, yes, you might have a great year or 2 or 3, but it's a career built on sand. There's no substance to it. There's no. But this is what I'm asking myself now. Does that even matter anymore? Do people actually care about that anymore?
To be honest, Archie, I don't really know if these things don't matter anymore. I think we're in a time of turmoil.
But it's a big time of
where
change,
like things are changing. Things have always changed rapidly. You know, like I remember when Facebook was a thing and then it wasn't a thing. You know, I remember when Instagram was the main thing and then now it's not anymore. You know, like everybody younger has moved on to TikTok, and it's like things are changing so rapidly. But like, I also feel that there needs to be like, and I want to get your views on that, like there needs to be some accountability from promoters, because I see many promoters that are just now going to book people who have built a massive social media following, and it doesn't really matter how they did it.
Yeah.
You know, like it doesn't matter how they did it. You can be an influencer and then become a DJ. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a lineup with these people. And I don't want to take away from that because there is people in that space that I genuinely think are cool. Like, you know, Fish Octagon, for example, you know. Like,
mate,
I have a lot of sympathy for that
for
guy.
years.
Sorry?
This guy's been collecting records for years.
Yes, I mean, and you could see the love for the culture.
His music,
you know,
and his
you
culture.
could see the love for the culture. So if it's going to happen to an Instagram person, you know, that's deservedly so. But like then, you know, you'll then have to still ask deeper questions, because the content creators are not the people who are creating the art, right?
Yeah.
The people who are creating the art are the producers. And I see many amazing producers who are not getting the time of day.
Well, this is it. You have
because
to be...
Because the social media isn't big enough.
You have to wear so many hats now, don't you? You have to you can't just like play great music or make great music anymore.
No.
To a certain extent, that actually is one of the least important things of success these days, sadly.
And it shouldn't be that way, I think.
It really shouldn't.
Yeah.
But, you know, you if you want to be a really skillful producer, a phenomenal DJ, and have a successful, you know, and be basically, long and short of it, good at marketing, which is in turn engenders a successful career, how do you do that?
Yeah. That mountain to climb seems almost insurmountable at this point, you know, because you're supposed to be good at so many different things, you know. And I get asked this a lot by people who like, you know, who want to break through. It's like, how do I build my social media, you know, like, and how do I do this? And, you know, obviously there's tried and tested tricks and things that you can do. But at the same time, sometimes I ask you, like, I don't know, like, because like I'm struggling with this as well. Totally, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to figure it out just as everybody else, you know, and like, and I'm also seeing like, okay, there's like, the one thing that I will say is that like, that always works is, and because I want people to not kind of despair and see like, no, it is possible. The one thing that is just always works is consistency, you know?
100%.
So as long as you're consistent in what you do.
But that's the same across every medium, right? Socials, with producing.
Absolutely.
And DJing, everything. It's just consistency and
consistency
spent,
and just grinding, you know what I mean? And like, and you can't predict for those viral videos to happen. But if you are consistent in like your social media strategy, and you have even just having a plan saying like, hey, on Mondays, I'm going to post my record of the month. On next, you know, 1 week later, it's going to be like, you know, footage from the last week's show. Then maybe I'm going to talk about creativity or whatnot, you know. Then it's maybe, you know, like some lifestyle stuff, you know. I think the people who are the best in this space have really understood that people want to have an inside view of your life and they open the lens. The people that come to mind now is like, and I mean, that's still crazy because that's not something that everybody can do. You got to go to a certain level until you can take a team with you that can document everything you do. But, you know, people like Josh Baker, Chris Dussy that have really sort of gotten onto YouTube now, and they're doing these long form things where like they're doing vlogs and, you know, also like, I mean, with Josh, sometimes he would just film himself going like, hey, you know, I'm out on a jog, you know, and he's just opened sort of the lens and shown people more of the life, and I think that's what people are really interested in. You know,
do you think that's gonna last forever?
No, and I think the more people do it, the less impact it will have as well, because, you know, it's novel now because there's not many people are doing the vlog style sort of content. But then, you know, if you look at YouTubers, you know, like that's been going for, you know, it's been going for a decade
and stuff like
now.
That's the future, right? And I just don't know whether it. I mean, maybe it does in music. It's just, for me, it's so unnatural. I'm naturally quite a private person, and I don't like particularly people like.
Same here. I think there's ways of doing it. Like, one thing that I found with Dojo is that, like, now I'm doing more educational style content. I don't have any problem of doing that all day, every day.
Yeah.
Because I'm passionate about it, and it feels very different than doing the other kind of content that you know I used to do, when it's just shows, when it's just you on the road. Basically, that sometimes felt a little bit forced. This doesn't now, because the passion is behind it. You know. So I think if you can find something that you're comfortable with, that you can do on a regular basis, that's a great thing. But
I think some people are just more naturally inclined to just get their phone out and start filming. That's the last thing I never
think of it.
It's the last thing I think
I just forget. Like, you know what? Even when I go on
like,
holiday,
have you take any pictures in that?
Yeah, I come back from holidays and I haven't taken a single photo. No sunsets. It's like it never happened.
I was having a good time. I was on holiday.
So when did you first start producing? So we've established the whole DJing thing now. The record label came before the producing. When was the leap into producing?
Well, the record label came probably, I would say, about the same time as producing.
Right.
Because I think I got Steinberg at uni, and I was kind of messing around. It's like
Cubase, right?
No, it's like the junior version.
Oh, right.
Of that.
Okay.
It wasn't like the full Cubase. I think it was just called Steinberg. Just called Steinberg. I think it was. I can't remember. I mean, even before that, you could argue I was doing like on EJ on PlayStation. So I was kind of like, you know, you had like a music production on PlayStation.
Yeah, you did. Many people started on that. All the dubstep guys started on that
exactly.
stuff. You know? Yeah.
So I was messing around that, and then I went on to Steinberg, and then when I graduated uni, I went to Point Blank Music School.
So did I.
Did you? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Wait, in Hoxton.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did the Introduction to Logic course there.
Same here, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And then I basically just taught myself the rest with like just hanging around people who knew what they were doing, watching them, sitting in on sessions. And then as YouTube got better and, you know, more in depth with stuff like that, then that kind of took over. But that was a very gradual thing. It took me a long time to get proficient because I was also doing internships and admin jobs in the music industry as well. So I was doing like, when I graduated, I had like 3 jobs. I was working in a pub. I was 2 jobs and studying. I was working in a pub. I was studying at Point Blank, and then I was doing a couple of days a week. I started at CR2 label. Yeah. And then I went to 360 management. And then, so I was assistant manager of like Dead Mouse, Mark Knight, Funk Agenda, Audio Bullies.
Yeah. I remember Audio Bullies well.
Yeah, Plump DJs, Stanton Warriors, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then I left there and I went to, or did I go to I was at Defected basically for like a summer as a marketing intern. So I had a bunch of different jobs, and then at night I would be sat in bed with my in-ear headphones on Logic, you know, so like gradually picking stuff up, and it really took until probably 2009, a couple of years. Until, I mean, I listen back to it now, and it's the early music that I was releasing. The fact that I had the audacity to release that music is just unbelievable.
But you know what, right? Like, and sorry to interject here, but I think this is a really important thing, because I always say to young artists, you're allowed to grow
totally
in the public eye. You not need to be a fully formed finished product
enjoy your
before
journey.
You like it. And
people
you know
like
what? The people that, like, I know some people that started producing, the people that were always just overly harsh and overcritical with their stuff and goes like, no, it's not good enough yet, it's not good enough yet. They never released anything, and they never got a career.
Totally,
you know?
Totally.
And I always said, like one of my early mantras were, we're not aiming for perfect, we're aiming for good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Is it good enough? Does it stick out like a sore thumb when you play it in the club? No. If you can get away with it, playing it in the set, then you can release it, and that will be somebody's favorite tune.
100%. And also, you know, that's the learning. That's part of the learning process. That's you play it. Why does it stick out? Like, okay, the kick's too loud.
Yeah.
What? Or because the synth is too obvious. It's like,
yeah.
That's then how you learn.
It's
then
part of the learning experience.
It's really important.
You need to play these things out in the club.
Totally.
You need to test them, road test them, go back, tinker. And like sometimes it took me months to get something right. You know? And,
yeah. You're just waiting. You're just working on a particular sound, snare, whatever, and something will just click.
Yeah. Also, what I found really interesting is what you said is like the amount of things that you did and were juggling at the same time while still pursuing production. Because one of the things that I hear very often is like, I haven't got the time, And when I always hear that, I haven't got the time, like I'm sympathetic, but I'm also at the same time saying like, well, that's what it takes. So what it takes is weekends,
it's up to you,
evenings, weekends.
Totally. I'd be working. I'd be sat on my computer till 3 a.m, and then my alarm would be for 6.
Yeah.
3 hours sleep a night.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 nights a week.
It's sacrifices that have to be made.
Sleep on the bus on the way to work.
Yeah.
Like that's literally what I'd be doing. I'd be like 3 hours sleep, wake up, get into the bus, literally get into the back corner, sleep all the way to work, wake up. It's just, it's what you've got to do. Otherwise, someone else will do it.
Yeah. Otherwise, somebody else who's hungry will do it. You know? Do you feel moving to London was an advantage at that point in your career, or maybe was it a disadvantage because of the financial pressures?
Well, it's a mix of both, really, because the financial pressure's there, but then I sometimes feel like pressure makes diamonds. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, if you're cushy at home and you don't have to pay any rent or whatever, then you just sit around and it's not like. If you've got the pressure and you've got like deadlines and it's good to have a bit of pressure sometimes.
The paradox is sometimes, and that's what I've noted, the more time I have, the less I was doing.
Totally.
And when I had like, hey, I got 3 or 4 hours to make music now before I have to get beyond the thing. That time's precious, and you're just like on it,
And that's why you'll cycle through ideas so much quicker, and you just be like, okay, it's not working. Swipe, it's not working.
No time to fuck around.
Okay, that sounds sick.
Yeah,
and I feel like. Okay, look, if you're like a very successful band or producer or whatever, and you've got like hundreds of thousands of pounds of budget to write an album and sit around and spend time, that's also wonderful.
Yeah.
But there's something really nice about the snapshot quality of making music when you're just jamming and throwing ideas around, and then something suddenly clicks, and that is what I think the great thing about especially this kind of music is it should be a snapshot. It's like a picture of that moment. And the more you spend on trying to perfect it, and is the further away you get from, like when you hear really, you referenced bass music earlier, like a lot of the dubstep stuff, that's so raw, that music you listen to. It's so raw and
so DIY,
basic and DIY. But that's the magic. That they weren't sitting there for hours and hours tweaking sounds. No, they were just getting stuff out, pressing it to dubplate.
No perfectly treated, audio treated studios and that. Just
exactly, and that's where the magic is.
Absolutely.
And then I guess the other the benefit of moving to London was the contacts, the environment, the influences. We wouldn't have met, obviously. I wouldn't have been going to Fuse. I wouldn't have been going to the End, to Fabric. I was going, literally every weekend. I'll be out the whole weekend. And that's kind of how I met my network, really.
Yeah, same.
Which, and you can only really do from going. I remember when I moved to London, I remember being sat in a hairdresser's, and the girl cutting my hair was like a serious clubber, and she was like, goes to Secret Sundays and stuff like this, and I was like, how do I start a party and stuff? She's like, you need to go out, you need to go and meet people and go and hang out at parties, and I was like, don't have to tell me twice.
So Done. She's like, I mean, first of all, like in sort of your 20s, your appetite for being out is like
insatiable.
Voracious, insatiable, and then. When you then tap into and I feel that time in London was particularly vibrant. A lot of Sunday parties.
2006 till about 13 was like magic.
Yeah.
Absolute
a lot of Sunday parties, a lot of DIY ethos, East London wasn't fully explored yet and gentrified yet.
Yeah, it felt like a frontier, didn't it?
Yeah, there was a lot of warehouse spaces. Yeah. And I remember the early days of Fuse, and we'd be like, oh, so-and-so, they're doing a party there, or they're doing a party there. Totally. And they'd be like three or four big things on that weekend, you know. Well, big for us at the time,
totally.
you know. Like if I think back about now, like I remember all of those DJs that we invited, and I used to like just, you know, like I used to like idolize them, you know what I mean? And now I'm thinking at like the kind of fees that we got for them and what they were playing. I was like, oh, like these guys were probably in the early stages of their careers. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And a lot of them aren't, you know, like active anymore. But yeah, it was a magic time in London at that time. Yeah.
And also there were just so many more clubs.
Yeah.
You know, Turnmills, the Cross, Key, Canvas.
Yeah.
That for me, that was a really that like area, the King's Cross Goods Yard.
Key, Canvas, Cross, you know.
Yeah, that was so
magic,
influential for me, especially when they used to do TDK when they opened them all.
I remember seeing Loco Dice there for the first time when he was like super minimal,
right?
You know, like just very, very hardcore German minimal stuff, you know, and like
beats and bleeps.
Just very, very like very cutting edge, you know, and like, and I remember seeing Dice there, and then like just being at the Cross all of the time. Yeah, London has lost a lot of that. I mean, I saw the news yesterday that Watergate is closing. You know?
Unreal.
And, I mean, that is just, it's just such a loss for the city. But Berlin has been dying a slow death in terms of electronic music.
Certainly
for the last 5 years.
You know? Do you think? Yeah. Well, it's definitely a slower death than London. London's has been really aggressive. And it really feels like, you know, some particularly unpleasant people have got in charge and have some, you know, some plans for this city, and no one is going to stand in the way of those plans. You know what I mean? Development plans and things like that. And you know, do you remember what was it, Operation Condor or something, when they tried to shut Fuse down on or they're trying to clear up Brick Lane?
Yeah, I remember.
And
oh my god, yes, I forgot about that.
250 police officers.
Police for raiding
and it was they sent them in on a Saturday because their intel was wrong.
I know.
And there was like 4 people in there.
And I think they found like one guy with a pill on them or something.
The only person they arrested was the burger man.
Yeah.
Because his license had expired the day before.
I remember
so the police
footage
commissioner actually got fired because of such a waste of resource and such an intelligence fuck up. So
I mean, you know what, even if they had come on Sunday, it was just a bunch of kids raving.
Exactly.
Like it's not like nothing you need 150 police vans for, you know, 250.
There's a really, if you Google Operation Condor Brick Lane,
oh my god, I
there's
forgot
a
about
really
that.
funny YouTube video where someone sped it up and they put the Benny Hill music over it. It's so good.
Oh my god, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
Wild times.
Yeah.
Raw times.
And then also at the similar time, you know what the police operation to shut down Fabric was called? Operation Lenore.
Okay.
Fabric softener. Isn't that gross?
That is
fucking gross. Operation Lenore, the fabric softener.
Oh my god.
So that just shows it was nothing to do with public safety or public interest.
Because they were
it was purely
on top of
to
that.
soften fabric and
they were on top of that. Fabric, I've never seen a more diligent venue in my life.
Totally.
For clubber safety, for care,
Absolutely.
for care for the punters, you know.
And look, it failed dramatically, spectacularly.
Yeah.
And Fabric won out.
Yeah.
Because of, for exactly those reasons, because the public stood up for them, because they've been there and made it such an amazing space for the public for all these years. And, you know, there was such an outrage and an outcry from the public that they had to sack it off. They had to fuck it off, and Fabric is still there.
People don't really realize how important these institutions are and these clubs are until they're gone, you know. And, you know, the times that we had, the encounters that we had there, you know, and you know, I would just like to encourage the younger generation. It's not just all about festivals and going to Ibiza once a year. It's also about your local club, you know. And if you haven't got a local club night, start one. You know,
100%. 100%.
Because, you know, like you just want to get that next generation excited. And, you know, I know like one thing that I love about the UK house scene is that it is very healthy, because I meet so many young guys and girls who are just hardcore into electronic music, house music, and you know, and they're just into it. You know, they're just into the culture.
I think what's funny now is the generation that are coming through now are, let's say, who are in their early 20s. Their parents were probably still raving when we started.
Yeah.
In fact, they definitely were.
Definitely.
So they are literally the kids of the parents who were playing the same records as we were listening to.
Can I tell you a story on that?
Through.
I played a couple of years ago in a very small Irish town called Tramore, right? They have a festival going, Tramore Festival and Tramore Racecourse. when I got picked up in the airport in Dublin and driven there, I was like, where the hell am I
Right,
going?
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like Irish countryside,
Nice.
right? And on that festival, on the big stage, it was me playing, then it was Kerry Chandler,
Nice.
and then Hot Since '82
Yeah.
afterwards. And I remember being there, like, and I finished my set, and Kerry arrived. And when Kerry arrived, he got mobbed by teenagers. By
Wow.
Irish teenagers, and they're like, Kerry, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. And I was like, I asked the promoter, I was like, what's going on here? Like, how do these kids know Kerry? Like, and he says he's been coming here for 20 years.
Wow.
And the people that are his fans here, like he's because they also had a club in that town.
Yeah,
And the guy, the
right.
promoter of the festival, also promotes the club, who'd been
Yeah.
doing the club for over 20 years. And he says, like, I had Kerry for years, and their parents, these kids' parents, have been raving to Kerry for the
Wow.
last 20 years.
That's crazy.
And he's part of the. And you know what Kerry did? After the festival set, he went to the club and played till 8 a.m. in the morning.
Legend. What a guy.
He did like
What
a
a guy.
full 6 hour
Legend.
set after his
Legend.
festival set, like in the local club there, because it's like a home game. And it's like, it was like a little
Amazing.
pocket of
That's crazy.
rural Ireland that are fully bought into like
That's
house
mad.
music, you know?
Do you reckon they've named Kerry, the town, after Kerry Chandler, and the butter Kerry Gold? Probably.
Kerry Gold.
That's all. It's named after Kerry Chandler.
Clearly. So, was there a breakthrough moment for you where you thought, like, now this is it? What was the moment for you where you thought, okay, I now have a serious career on my hands. I can give up the day job. Like, what was that breakthrough moment? I mean, tell me even if there was one, or whether it was a more gradual process. And
It was a
how did you
gradual
know?
one. There were definite steps, obvious steps, where things happen where I was like, oh wow, okay, well this is happening now. Like I guess the first one was probably when I was at my 9-to-5 job and I was watching YouTube videos about the Ibiza opening of that year, which was probably 2011 or 12, and it was Marco Carola opening track, and it was my track, and I was like, what?
Yes.
What? And I was like, wow, that's crazy. That's the
Always
first
a
time.
wild moment
Yeah,
when
it was
you hear that.
Amnesia Terrace. I was like,
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
my God. So there was that. So I think that was 2013. Yeah, that was in the summer of 2013. I then quit my job at the end of that year, not because I was in a position to, because I took a leap of faith. Because basically I had a sort of hallucinogenic experience, which pretty much I saw into the future of what my life would be like if I took the leap of faith, and that basically showed me the path that my life would take if I took the leap of faith and quit my job. That was on the Friday. That was quite soon after that video happened, so I was like obviously in the mindset like, well, you know, my music is getting played in the clubs, and so I did that, and I went back in on the Monday because my boss at the time was saying, look, you need to make a decision here, because I was DJing regularly at that point on the weekends, but I wasn't earning nearly enough money, if any at all, to be able to quit my job and pay my rent, etc. So I then went back into the work, and my boss was like, you need to make a choice, basically. So I went back into the office on Monday, and I was like, I've made my choice, I'm really sorry, I'm out. So I worked till the end of the year, left around Christmas time, and I moved home. My mum, I basically called my mum and told her the dilemma, and she was like, fuck your job, move home, come and, you know, you love your music, that's what you want to do. She's like, I wish that I'd followed photography. I wish I'd been a photographer, and I never did it because my parents didn't support me in it. So she was like, I'd love to, you know, to give you a roof. You didn't have to pay any rent. So I moved home. It was really sweet. You know, I was very lucky. And that was, so that was really to focus on music. And so during that period, I wrote Mind Blank, Troublemaker.
I
Works on
remember that
Sunday.
time vividly, actually,
Yeah.
when you moved home.
Yeah, totally. We
were
spoke
talking
regularly on Skype and stuff.
Yeah.
So I wrote those 3 records, and that summer I went to Ibiza, summer of 2014, when Fuse was at Sankey's. And I went basically armed with those records. Mind Blank and Works on Sunday came out on Fuse. Troublemaker came out on it was the first release on a new label at the time called Succumvit, which is Ben Balance's label. Ben Balance is playing for us at Watergate. Yeah, full circle. And that was also, I guess, the beginning of when like you had to get videos of your tracks being played in clubs. So I was out, you know, for the Ibiza season every night, and I was getting videos of people playing my music, and it was like Apollonia was playing my music, and Marco and whoever else. And so I was posting those videos and they were getting, you know, virality. And by the end of that summer, pretty much I had a semi-decent touring career, you know, but still, you know, very not great fees or anything like that. But I was busy every weekend. I had at least one gig or whatever. So I felt pretty confident in fully committing to the career at that point. And then from then, I think going from, let's look at it in what like 4 tiers of artists. From going from a tier 4 to tier 3 was probably, I think my album had a big part to play in that, because I got a lot of press. I got an essential mix off the back of that. So that takes us up to 2019. 2018, 2019,
yeah,
I
just
think.
before the
pandemic.
Yeah.
And then, so that was I think probably took me up to like tier 3. And then weirdly, I think COVID had a quite beneficial effect on my profile, because I was active online. I did lots of like tutorial stuff. I didn't do many live streams really. I don't really think that they had any effect, but doing tutorial stuff, being quite open and speaking. And
I remember you did your record of the week back then.
Record of the week. I was good with doing
just
that.
Digging, you know.
Just digging, doing, you know, just doing stuff that people can. Everyone's just sat at home on their phones doing, you know. And so I think coming off the back of that COVID, I then had a really good summer, and that's pretty much sort of takes us up to where we are now, really. Yeah.
Which is a pretty relentless touring schedule. I mean, it's been relentless for
it's been relentless
since 2019.
Pretty much, yeah. 18 and 19 were the first 2 years where I was really busy, and then from 21, 22 onwards, it's just been absolutely like relentless.
How do you balance your life with your touring schedule? How do you stay sane on tour when things get that busy? And how has becoming a father impacted your life now in terms of your outlook and how you manage your time and these things?
Yeah. Okay. So the balance thing, I don't really know. I think I got all of the imbalancing stuff out of my system in the early years, you know, because when you start going on tour and you start, you know, free drinks and whatever else is offered to you on a plate,
you got to be really
you take it with both hands, you know, like, and I certainly did for the first few years. And then I just sort of, and luckily, naturally, it just phased out, and I wasn't really that bothered by it, you know, in more recent times. And then in terms of the fatherhood thing, I mean, it totally changes all of your, and you know, everyone always says this, but like, and you can never quite prepare yourself for what it actually means to you, but it just totally changes your entire perspective on what's important in life, what your objectives are, you know. Because I'm an only child, so the touring thing was always easy for me because I like being on my own to a certain extent. I really enjoy my own, you know, time on my own. So it's a perfect job, really, for someone like me. But then when you have a child, that you just, it's so weird because you're constantly thinking about them. And you know, you miss them, and then being on your own becomes really difficult, you know, really hard. So it's more of a challenge, and certainly like the demands on your time and your attention and life when you have a kid are just, it's
like people always say, like, you know, you think you can imagine how full on it is becoming a parent, but nobody really prepares you to
relentless.
how relentless it actually is.
24/7. There are demands on your attention and your time and your, you know, it's been a challenge for sure. But you know what? It's funny. You somehow find the bandwidth and the time. You end up, you know, doing your calls with your, you know, your baby under your arm, or you're like scrubbing the floor or wiping.
Yeah, we've had a few calls and you're just like, hang on, emergency, baby.
And then, sorry, mate, I'm back. Yeah, exactly. So you just manage, don't you? You know, I don't know how people with more than one do it. Like Enzo's got 3.
Yeah,
he's got 3.
But he's Sicilian. That's like
sure.
It's like it's in the blood,
that's
you know.
Fucking hardcore, man.
I feel Enzo's always been a family man.
Totally.
Even before,
that's why he created
even before
Fuse,
you had
mate.
a family, you know.
That was his family.
Like literally, like everybody that worked at Fuse was a cousin.
Totally. Oh yeah.
All of them.
The mafia.
You know. Just so many cousins, like it's in his blood. I wanted to quickly go back to something that I forgot talking about that I think is really important, which is you've always seemed to have a really good work ethic. Is that something that you had to cultivate, or was that something that you just had? Like, because like I was really somebody that was struggling with my personal work ethic, and I had to kind of use every trick in the book to get to where I am now.
Yeah.
And I still struggle sometimes, like I can have lazy periods or days where I procrastinate and whatnot. And like, were you always pretty good with that, or was it something that you had to cultivate?
It's a good question. I think I cultivated it when I was younger. When I basically was in that period of life where I really wanted to join the army, I got really disciplined and really fit and really. So that part of my brain was trained and switched on. And then later, when that passed, I think there was certain personal circumstances that required me to have no choice, really. When I made that leap of faith of just doing music full time, there's no safety net. Zero. And so you don't have a choice. Pretty much.
Got to make it work.
You've got to make it work. So having that fire under your arse is is like that. You I guess then that activates that part of the brain that I had developed years before. And you just get your head down and get it done. And you have to.
It's very interesting because, for me, my experience with this was also that, like, when you still have another job, basically, and you're not full-time in music, and you have that safety net, like, I always encourage people to just, like, keep that going as long as they can, because there's nothing worse than just, like not having enough shows or not having enough income.
I never advise anyone to do what I did. Ever.
But at the same time, it does light that fire under our ass. So like, I've got to make it work, and I've got to literally I remember the times where when you were hustling for gigs, like hustling, where you were like, I'm going to call everybody that I know. I'm going to write to everybody that I know, and I've got to get a show this weekend, basically. And that's the extent. Like, and this is before you have agents. Like
absolutely,
You hustle and you hustle.
Well,
hard.
A decent agent's not going to take you unless you've already got a busy diary, right?
Right.
And you've got to make that diary busy yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
I think that's probably changed a bit now. I think certainly when we were coming up, that was more...
People take on artists early on now that seem to be
development
promising.
artists. Yeah. But the thing is, with that, is they'll take a development artist on, but they don't give a shit. I mean, with the big agency, they don't give a shit. They'll drop them in 6 months. And the problem with that is if you come up with an artistic, venture, profile, and it doesn't work, then you can't then just go, oh well, you'll make it work on your own. And once a decent agent's dropped you, your career's kind of over. So I think it is really important to build a career on very solid foundations before you start going out and doing stuff like that, because the danger is, agencies, they're pretty ruthless. They don't,
they're pretty ruthless. I mean, like, as long as you're making the money, and you're popular, then that's when they put in the graft. But when they see that things maybe are getting very challenging or what,
or a sound is changing or whatever, then the big ones will just drop you.
But the same goes for artists, right? Because like we drop agents when they don't deliver.
This is true. This is true.
And you've dropped a few, I've dropped a few in my career. And that is also a necessary process. Where like you feel that somebody's not delivering for you. If you think you have the confidence, you think that you can work more.
Totally.
But for some reason, it's not gelling.
You might outgrow them, or they might be into a different. Like I've had times when I've left agents because they're into a different sound, and they'll make suggestions and try to put me on lineups where I'm like, no, that's not the right fit. And if you don't know innately what I should be doing, then it's not the right fit.
Yeah, that's happened twice in my career where I had to change agents because I just looked at the roster, and the roster was different when I joined the agency, and then I looked at the roster.
It's moved. You've not moved. It's moved.
And like all of a sudden, I find myself like on a roster with a bunch of melodic techno afterlife people, and I'm just like, I'm not right here.
But the thing is, they can see that that's the big sound now, so they kind of have to follow that, and for their own bottom line. At the end of the day,
I mean, they need to make money as well.
They've got staff to pay. I think that's the other thing. I think with that, as your career grows, and you have to take on more staff, because you suddenly, you know, the scene has changed. You need a social media manager, and you need someone. You've got a record label, so you need someone to manage the label,
right?
And you're so busy that you need an assistant.
Yeah.
And you know, you start working and think, I don't know, stuff like brand deals and things like that. And all of a sudden you've got 8 staff you've got to pay. The pressure and also that goes back to the studio as well. It's like, and having to do stuff in short time because maybe you've got 2 days a month in the studio and you've got to get something out, and which is, you know, it's not a nice feeling and it's not that creative. But if you can get your head around it, it's fine. But it's like the bigger your profile gets, the more financial demands there are,
the more demands on your time,
more demands on your time and stuff like that. So you just have to kind of learn how to manage everything and structure it all properly.
If you could go back in time and says like, hey, like, is there any advice that you would give to yourself?
Yeah, my main thing that I look back and my regrets are always overthinking stuff and not just doing. Just do. Just fucking do it. Like I'm just starting an events brand now, properly. We're just doing label pies. Why is it taking me this long? Because I've kept overthinking it. Oh, I shouldn't do it now because. Just fucking do it. Yeah. Just get it done, because if it doesn't work, so what? It doesn't matter. Yeah. You get up, you try again, like everything else. I mean, you've got to be pretty thick-skinned in this game. And like, remember that teeny thing, fail better?
Yeah.
So you just fail better. Like you're going to fail, aren't you, until you succeed. So you might as well start and get... So that, my number
taking
one,
action, essentially.
Just taking action and stop overthinking. Just do it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can totally co-sign that. If I had to give some advice to my younger self, is to just get off your ass and fucking do things, you know?
Totally, exactly.
Like, whenever I got off my ass and actually did things, good things happened.
Good things happen.
You know, like...
Life gives back to you. If you put energy out there and you give to life, it always gives back. And look, sometimes it might be, you know, even if you're trying to figure out, like, oh, I don't know whether I want to do this or not, well, try it.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, great, you've ticked that off, and you definitely know you don't like that now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I feel also it's like it's almost impossible for you to do good work and then being overlooked. Like, you must be doing something seriously wrong to do very good work and being overlooked.
Yeah.
If you're consistent and you're doing good work, if you're putting on a great party, whatever, like, people will notice. Remember that quote from the Field of Dreams? Build it and they will come, you know?
Exactly.
I mean, I think that's such a beautiful sentence, you know? Like,
absolutely.
Because, like, just build it and they will come.
The only thing I would say on that is I think it's harder now when if you're not flavour of the month, your music can be as good as you want. But if you're not flavour of the month, then people will just scroll straight past you.
Yeah.
And because that's what it's down to now. It's not down to going into the record shop and putting a needle on a record and going, that's a banger. Who's it by?
Yeah.
It's not that way around anymore. It's, oh, who's this? Let's listen to the music. It's literally, you know.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like, because everyone's consuming their music on their phone and stuff, they'll just they won't even listen. You know what I mean? So I think that's completely changed. I remember going the other day, I was driving in London, there was a billboard, it said, discover new music on TikTok. And I was like, no,
you don't.
No.
You don't discover new music on TikTok at all.
Do not. It's like, it's just.
I mean, like YouTube, you know.
Yeah,
like,
you go down a YouTube rabbit hole and you find some amazing stuff.
YouTube is unbelievable. Yeah.
So, it's incredible.
Yeah.
But that whole thing is just really, especially the way that the algorithms work, and it, you know, people make these TikTok edits and they do like sped up versions, slow down versions. The intro's only a quarter of a second long. It's like, where's this going?
Yeah.
Where's it going to end up?
Yeah.
Because it's certainly taking away from the art form of music. You know, like I 100% feel that the passion and the artistry is disappearing. I mean, there's definitely pockets where that's not the case. Like some of the more headsy festivals, more headsy parties, that's still alive and well.
I think that's always going to exist, and they're
totally.
sort of, they're actively steering against that trend, you know. But yeah, like, I mean, I see this a lot as well, and something I'm concerned about, especially what I'm concerned about is its demands on young artists in terms of what they have to achieve on social media and how their social media has to look, you know. It can't just be a video of a gig anymore. It has to be filmed in a certain way, you know. It has to be filmed by somebody who really knows what they're doing, you know. Like, how does a middle tier DJ even now get good footage without like spending, you know, a quarter of his money on a videographer?
Totally. I think also the other thing is it's even developed from that. It's not just that. It's now doing stuff in the video that's eye-catching, like, you know, without mentioning any names, the headscarf phenomenon.
Oh my
right?
God, yeah. Or a certain dance,
or a certain dance,
movement,
or eating a pizza, or some It's things like that now. Gimmicks that get ahead. So it's not about music anymore, is it? It's about videos.
But how do we solve this? Like, who does the responsibility lie with? Is it with the promoters? Is it with the artists? Look, should the artist not play that game?
I think the thing is, because that sort of 1% percentile is getting squeezed even more and more and more, where there's less and less clubs that you can play, and it's all festivals. You know, it's all so the middle class of DJ has been completely eaten out, right? So there is none anymore. So it's either you're an up and comer, or you're massive. And how do you get massive? It's by making silly videos. You're not going to get massive without. As simple as that. I mean, you might get the odd person here and there who gets through by pure skill and whatever else, but that's name one. Name one. Seriously, I can't. You know. So
I feel in the UK there's some up and coming artists that are kind of popping off and are being successful. I'm thinking especially of like people like Max Dean, Luke Dean.
Oh yeah. No, I'm talking top tier. I'm talking like, you know,
are like,
but these guys are doing wicked music, and they're doing it the right way.
Who are doing really amazing music, and it doesn't seem to be built on like a social media hype.
But they do great content, and it's cool. I watch that, and it doesn't make my skin crawl. Like I really like their stuff, but most of it really like I can't even go on Instagram anymore.
Yeah, I feel the same. I don't know. Like I feel a lot of it is very narcissistic, and it's like look at me, and to a certain extent that's part of the music industry, and it's always been like that. But at the same time, it's like we never used to shove ourselves like into it so much. You know, like I remember when like you know, getting your DJ video at a gig was just like you facing the crowd, and it was like. We filmed the crowd was like center, and it was you. It was like people would see your back, and you'd see the crowd reaction. And that was the way to film a DJ video. And now the way to film your DJ video is in your face, basically,
right up close as well,
right up face, and then you get like a close, a little flick of the crowd at the end, you know. And it's just so much more personality driven. And I don't know if that is a good thing to do. I think maybe we as artists and also as promoters, there's a responsibility to push back against this. And one thing that I would really like to see from promoter is just like, don't put people on lineups that haven't contributed to the culture in a meaningful way. Like if you're just an influencer, you know, and you are great, you have 2 million followers, you know, but like how many records have you released? You know, like are you really a great DJ? There should just
be an influencer festival, where just the influencers go and play, and that's cool, and they can go off and do their stuff.
Let's get the guy from Fire Festival to organize it.
Totally.
He'll be great at that. I feel like we've already touched on this. Like I was going to ask you, how has the music industry changed, you know, since you broke through, and kind of just elaborating on what we've just talked about now, how things have changed now. Like what is your advice for young artists who are trying to make it right now? Like what should they focus on? Is it still the same things that were relevant for us, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's changed so much, hasn't it? I mean, from a selfish point of view of what I want to hear and see, I would say focus on in the studio and make great music and learn how to be an exceptional DJ. But I think if you want to be successful, I think it's probably more like really get your head around marketing. Yeah. I mean, look, we assume the music's good, like before you even got out the gate. Like if you're good enough to even consider like a serious career, then that's cool. So we probably don't even have to talk about that because the music's already good enough. And actually, some of the music being made now is so good. Yeah. Wicked music, man.
I feel the kids have leveled up so much from when we were releasing music.
Do you think that's a COVID thing? Do you think that was, everyone had...
I don't know. I think it's just production's just an endless game. And obviously like people are building and building and building,
Absolutely.
You know.
Well, for me, I think it's really, it's made me get even more excited about DJing because I feel like because the music's so good, I fucking love DJing so much now because like sometimes when you're playing, you're like, and you do like a mix where accidentally something will happen, which is like, two things happen at once with double drops and something sounds amazing accidents. And you're like, fuck, this is really good. Like, this is really good, Where I think before, where the music was different, right? And it was more loopy, like during the Cecile era. It was still, it's great music and it's fun and it's groovy, but like the sort of the whole, I really like the fact that the acids come back in and there's a lot more old school elements and stuff like that. It's
and
a lot
really
more
hooky
fun.
and melody hooks
Exactly.
are like a big thing now.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's a lot more fun to play.
I had to really adapt as a producer, you know, to go like, okay, go, like the game's changed, everybody's leveled up, you know, you really got to play with your call and response, different melody hooks, you know, loads of different melody hooks in one track, you know, where in the past there would be like just
one or maybe two,
or maybe
but now
two.
it's sections.
Now it's like different sections, like that section and that section and that section, and like it's really leveled up. And I'm still excited about the music being. I've been more excited than ever about the music that's being released. So I'll share those feelings about that. Certainly with the music side of things, we're in a great place. Yeah, with the social media, I also share your thoughts there. I think as young artists, you can't neglect one thing, you know? I mean, I hate to say it, but like I have turned down artists for signing on the label because there was just tumbleweed on their social media profile. And the reason for that is it's like, well, it should be just about the music. It's like, well, no, the label is a business, and if I know that you're not going to recoup as an artist what I'm
end up
paying
costing
for,
you money, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
it's going to end up costing me money, and you know, and I can't afford to just run a charity business.
you can take the odd punt here and there if you really believe in the music and you know that they're at a really early stage in their career and they will develop their socials and stuff like that, and you probably will get another 2 or 3 records off them down the line, then it's worth making the investment. But if it's something where it's like it's a really cool record that you're going to play in the club, but there's not enough social profile that you know that you're going to get, you know, that you're at least going to, you know, cover its cost. Then, you know.
So yeah, I think the advice to young artists is like, you know, while you're working on, you know, the creative side of things, while you're honing your skills as a producer, while you're honing your skills as a DJ, you know, get into the marketing game early on, understand the social media game, be smart with it, be proactive with it. Yeah. Don't just see it as like a chore or an afterthought.
Yeah, it needs
to be
an integral
part of your career.
As into it as you are as you're DJing and you're producing, really, don't you?
Yeah.
And I can't give any advice on social media because I really don't understand it still. I just, you know, I don't.
The only advice that I can give on it, and I'm not claiming to be great on social media, but the only advice that I can give on it is like consistency. You know, some things that I realized on, you know, people that have broken through just on social media, for example, like Fish Octagon, you know, is that like, you know, he doesn't have massive engagement in every single video.
Yeah.
But what he does is he does a video every day.
Yeah.
You know, and some of them will get insane, you know, reach and, you know, insane virality, and a lot of them won't. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter because it's his consistency that matters.
I think also you look at some people who've had a massive viral video and you assume that it's just a one-off.
No, like,
you don't look. They've spent years, you know, consistently doing it, and then something eventually clicks, you know.
I saw Fleur blow up from like 35k followers to like 300k followers almost overnight.
Yeah.
I had talked to her about that before, and you know, like, and she had taken social media very seriously 6 months prior to that happening, and she was like, I'm posting every day now. I'm posting every day. And I think something happens where, like, you know, like the algorithm realizes, okay, like, so this profile is very active, there's a lot of interactions here, we're going to put you on the homepage, you know.
Yeah.
And once you're like on the homepage where, like, you know, people start flicking through, then that chance for virality is like very high. It was not a one-off. It was definitely something that was down to like 6 months of graft, and you know, it really has taken her career to the next level. You know, but you know, luckily the thing with Fleur is
she's a great DJ as well. And she makes wicked music.
She's a great DJ.
So when stuff like that happens,
she's the full package as an artist.
Totally. And
you know?
when it happens for people like that, I love seeing that. I fucking love seeing that. It's more when you see like someone who you can tell they've just focused on socials and they haven't done the other two parts.
And there's I'm not going to name any names, but there's a certain, you know, there's like a German influencer that's become a big techno DJ, and she, you know, she's recently got some really bad press because she also acted extremely rudely to like other artists that were playing before her, whatever. And I'm just saying, it's just like,
that's something you don't. You need to have years of experience under your belt to know how to act and know how to behave, and
to realize that this scene is a village.
Everyone knows everyone.
Everybody knows everybody. Totally. And if you're a fucking dick, people are gonna find out real fast.
I had a really good really good expression the other day. It was careful whose toes you tread on the way up.
Yeah.
Because they're attached to the arse you have to kiss on your way down. So good, isn't it?
I've heard that one before, but not in the exact same way.
Yeah.
That is very true. Let's talk about what's coming next in your career. You've touched earlier on that you're now doing the events more seriously. I just want to hear what's going on in the world of microhertz, but also in terms of your releases and the music that's coming out.
Well, let's do in a chronological order. So I've got a record out this Friday called Impress Me, with a vocal from Tanisha the Wordsmith, which was very much inspired by like old school 90s stuff, and it's a really cool spoken word vocal. I think I've sent it to you.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, that's out this Friday. I did 2 mixes of that. So the first mix that I did actually is coming out afterwards. I'm trying a new thing where I'm doing like almost like a waterfall thing. So one release is out this Friday.
Yeah.
One record's out this Friday, which is the club mix, which is a more kind of a bit deeper. And then another one out in a few weeks' time, which is more sort of terracey. That's that. Then basically in October, from the 10th, we are starting the Microhertz label tour.
Nice.
And that starts actually at Watergate, which which was pretty crazy, because that has a very special place in my heart, just from early days of touring and hanging out in Berlin and going clubbing and loving every single minute I spent in that club. So I was really excited when we booked the show there. And then a few weeks ago, we got the message saying that they're closing at the end of the year. So I was like, oh my God. And it's also such an honor. So you knew
in advance almost, yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's also such an honor that we get to do one of the last shows there. And I think it's going to be, I thought, oh great, it's a Thursday night. And I thought I played quite a few Thursday nights at Watergate, and it's like, it's fun. But I think it's going to be really special, because
the Thursday is the one for the heads, basically.
Totally.
That's always been the sort of time slot for the people that really know their music. And then on the water floor downstairs, that's really where you can get some long magical nights.
Yeah, totally.
Till.
But I think it's going to feel pretty special, because I think there'll be lots of people coming over for it who've maybe never been and want to experience it, or been before and
just
want
to get one more dance in there. Yeah.
So that's cool. Then we're going on to Basel the next day at Nordstern. We are going from there to Manchester. That's me all night long at the Loft. And then we're going to Input in Barcelona.
Nice.
Amazing club.
Yeah.
And then we're at Shelter in Amsterdam. And then we finish the tour in Bucharest at a big warehouse venue we're doing with the Sunwaves crew.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's going to be cool. Lots of artists from the label. And it's going to be a lot of fun.
Amazing, man.
Yeah.
So that wraps it up. Thank you so much for doing this,
Thanks a lot,
Archie.
mate. It's been really
really
fun.
appreciate it, man. Thanks so much, bro.
Great to catch up.
Yeah, awesome.
Nice one.